Welcome to Fronteras, Changing America. I'm Carlos Correa. On the program, Lori Comallie-Caplan, a New Mexico licensed master social worker who stays busy running her practice and getting many area youth through self-esteem, anxiety, anger, and stress management issues. We'll talk to her about some of the social emotional problems facing young Hispanics, plus what parents can do to help. And it's a disorder affecting about 200,000 people in the United States. Tourette's Syndrome affects all races and ethnic groups. We'll talk about the myths and facts of what's commonly known as TS. But first, a local teen is using his life to teach a real important lesson. 15-year-old Joseph Ortiz is a champion of Tourette's, and he's taking his fight all over southern New Mexico, educating many of us unfamiliar with the disorder. Joseph Ortiz is your typical teenager. He loves hanging out with his friends, he works hard to get good grades, and enjoys being active. His favorite sport is swimming.
I've been swimming since I was 6 years old.
It can be very competitive, and for Joseph, swimming is also one of the only things to help keep him calm and focused.
It's where I belong. I don't know, the water just makes me feel at home.
You see, when Joseph turned 8, he was diagnosed with Tourette's Syndrome, a neurological disorder where a person has both motor and vocal tics.
What it is my brain actually is built differently and chemically different than your brain or his brain. I mean, of course, everyone's brain is different, but mine especially so. And because of that, my brain has a lot of extra nerve synapses, and a lot of those manifest themselves in the form of tics.
When he's in the water, those tics seem to vanish, but outside the pool, Joseph can't help his actions.
They're uncontrollable. I'm not choosing to do them. Like you may notice, I'll shake my head a lot, or I'll wave my hands a lot. I'll clack my teeth back and forth.
When most people talk about Tourette's syndrome, they think of coprolalia, a symptom causing a person to blurt out profanities, but that tic is uncommon. Less than 10% of people with Tourette's actually have it. Joseph is one of the few. He developed coprolalia in middle school.
You can suppress them for, a while, just as you could, not blink your eyes for a while. But then I would have to take a lot more afterwards, just as, your eyes would start to sting, and then you have to just, close your eyes.
Experts say Tourette's is no longer considered a rare condition. Between 1 and 10 children per 1,000 have Tourette's, and as many as 10 per 1,000 people have tic disorders such as eye blinking, coughing, throat clearing, sniffing, and facial movements.
Tourette's has it has its difficulties. It has a lot of, strings attached to it. It's really hard. School is really hard. Doing a lot of activities is, really hard, especially if you're ticking while you're doing them, but I feel it's made me a better, stronger person as a result.
Tourette's has also given Joseph more confidence. He recently became the youth ambassador to the Tourette's Syndrome Association, bringing awareness to people throughout southern New Mexico.
A lot of part of my job and part of my experience growing up actually has been to deal with people who don't know about Tourette's, because the majority of people know nothing about Tourette's syndrome. But in my experience, especially pertaining to the whole bullying in the schools campaign, in my experience, the kids in the schools are some of the most compassionate and kind and understanding people I've ever met. I mean, my friends are amazing. They've helped me through, thick and thin, anything that I can talk to them about anything, and it's great. And because they genuinely, I feel that they genuinely express interest, like they want to learn, they want to know.
Joseph visits organizations and schools who want to learn more about Tourette's. His favorite moments are when those in his class discover many people with Tourette's syndrome can accomplish pretty much anything they want.
I can drive, I can drive really well.
How long have you been driving?
I've been driving since, actually not even that long, like 2 weeks ago, a week. But sometimes the tics will act up and I'll need to pull over maybe and just take a break, have something to drink or something,
Joseph is encouraged by all the support and says he's eager to lobby at the state capitol or even in Congress on behalf of the many people living with Tourette's syndrome. In the meantime, he plans to continue doing what he loves while inspiring others just like him to be active. whether it's in the community or in sports.
Any kid who has Tourette's syndrome or ADHD or OCD, any type of disorder that can cause a lot of distraction or cause a lot, definitely be involved in sports. It's wonderful because it helps get all of that energy out. It helps get, you know, whatever you need to do out.
And Lori Comallie-Caplan joins us now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Let's first start with, you work a lot with young people, and there are several issues that a lot of young people have. The first one that comes to mind is bullying. There's a lot of that going on in high schools and especially in middle schools. How do you address that with young people?
You'd be surprised. There's a lot of it going on in elementary schools. And one of the things that we have to help kids understand is how to be assertive yet not aggressive, how to be able to speak up for themselves. One of the things that I have to talk to my elementary students about is the difference between tattling and telling. You know, if you're tattling, you're trying to get someone in trouble. That's your intent, that's your motivation. But if you're telling, you're trying to get help for somebody. So whether it's help for them or help for someone that they see being bullied, it's really important to tell about that. Tell an adult, tell someone who can, you know, give you some help.
What are some of the reasons that some of these kids that come to you are being bullied?
There's a variety of reasons. For some of them, they more easily play the victim. They're rather quiet, they're withdrawn, or it might be something that is, they may have an exceptionality of some type. You know, they may stutter, or they may have a physical disability, and sometimes those differences sort of point them out as being someone who might be bullied. And so there's a variety of reasons, but a lot of times it's because they don't speak up for themselves. They may not feel good about themselves, or they may not feel worthy enough to speak up for themselves, and they become that target.
Now we're seeing in the last couple of years a lot to do with the internet, bullying over the internet. Is that something that you also deal with as far as the kids?
I haven't had that experience yet. I know that the frequency of that is going up tremendously, and I think that the same kinds of issues are at stake. You know, somebody who's out there on Facebook that may not present a very confident person may present themselves as a target, you know, and so when they demean themselves on an internet chat room or Facebook or something, then that kind of makes them a target for other people to bully.
Now, some of the issues that maybe young people, specifically who are Hispanic, deal with a lot is poverty, immigration status, bullying, education, language issues. I'd like to kind of break that down and talk about each of them. First, with poverty, the economy is bad, parents are struggling. How do you deal with a kid who comes to you who has parents who either lost a job or can't afford to put food on the table?
A lot of that has to do with anxiety. I mean, the characteristic that I see most often is that kind of panicky state, that anxious state, a lot of worrying from kids. And so we have to work with their anxiety. You can't tell a kid not to be worried about those things. I mean, that's an obvious condition, but to the point that it interferes with their school abilities or their everyday life, we want to help them to work through that anxiety in a productive manner. So giving them some coping skills, even if it's finding small things for them to do to help the family situation, that can make a difference in their lives, as well as, you know, some relaxation techniques and things that just help to reduce their anxiety. So
then parents shouldn't not talk about those issues with their child, right?
They should not talk about them.
So they should be open
I think they should talk to them. I think they should be open, but you have to keep the child's developmental level in mind. So, you know, you're not going to tell a 2-year-old the same thing you would tell a 16 or 17-year-old. And so you have to monitor the type of information, how much information you give them, depending on the child's developmental level and their ability to cope with that information.
How much stress do you think it is for a young Hispanic who may not be a citizen or whose parents may not be citizens, who may be illegally here in this country? How do you cope with that as a child, do you think?
I'm not sure I could cope with that if I were a child. I mean, because you think about that every day, you're thinking there's a chance that, we will be deported. There's a chance that I'll lose a family member or a close friend who's also illegal. And so that preoccupies their mind. And so I think it tends to interfere a lot with their ability to do well in school, their ability to establish good, strong relationships, because I might lose that relationship. So I think making sure that they have appropriate social networks and resources to help them cope is extremely important. Sometimes kids really, in multiple areas, not just this particular issue, feel like I'm the only one. And it's much harder to deal with something if you think I'm the only one going through this. And so getting kids together who have that are like-minded, but also sometimes have like problems, and allowing them to talk with each other and how do you cope with this, and having an adult who can facilitate and help them through some of those difficult areas, I think is really important. And involving the parents with that. A lot of times kids hide their problems from their parents because they know their parents have these problems and they don't want to add to the amount of stress in their family or that their parents already have. And so I think it's really important that we get open communication going with both kids and their parents and extended family members, because that provides that social network and that social support that they need.
Are there any signs to look for that perhaps a parent at home watching may be dealing with their child, whether it's immigration status or bullying, education?
Well, I think what we need to look at is what are the symptoms that may be interfering. And so I think it's important for us to continually look to see if a child is depressed or if we have a child that's highly anxious. And so if we're looking at depression, we might see a child who suddenly kind of withdraws from the normal activities that used to make them happy, or they want to sleep a lot and they're trying to escape through sleeping. Changes in eating habits, changes in sleeping patterns, those kinds of things are red flags if we have abrupt changes in those areas that persist over time.
And Lori, I think I met you a couple of weeks ago when you were doing a presentation at a local school. And there you were talking about Tourette's Syndrome. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is and the type of reaction that people get when they hear Tourette's Syndrome?
Some people get no reaction at all because they have never heard of it, and other people think, oh my gosh, is it contagious? What's going on here? And so we have this extreme continuum. And then some people are knowledgeable and they have some sense of what Tourette's is. But a lot of times what their some sense is incorrect, and they think of the person who continually curses, and that's what Tourette's is. And actually that's not as prevalent as we would think in the area of Tourette's. So let me back up a little bit. What Tourette's is a vocal tic and a motor tic that persists for over a year. And it's usually diagnosed between the ages of 7 and 10, although I have worked with students who have had the diagnosis at age 4. So depending on how familiar your specialist is, you may diagnose it prior to age 7. What we tend to see in the very beginning is a very simple motor tic. For most students, what we're looking at is eye blinking and face grimacing. That's generally the first thing that becomes apparent. And it can progress from there to other simple motor tics. Simple motor tics would be things like that only involve one group of muscles, so maybe just the shoulder shrug, just the blinking of the eye, something that's very simple. However, there's a lot of kids that have complex Tourette's, which would, the motor tics would be a group of muscles. So it could be every time you have this, you also have this, or this and this. Or some kids, it's so complex that they have to hop or skip certain steps on the floor as they're walking or traversing down a hallway.
And they can't control it at all.
No, it is, well, not at all. I'll tell you what, I'm going to come back to that point in just a minute. The vocal tics also have a simple versus a complex. So the simple might be just throat clearing, or barking, or grunting. The more complex could be echolalia, which is, as you're going I'm going and I'm echoing whatever you say to me. Or it could be the coprolalia, which is the cursing part. That's more complex Tourette's, right? So we have simple and complex in both of those areas. Go back to the question now that you just asked me.
Do they control it, or I know that talking to the gentleman in the video before, or actually listening to you talk as well, that they can control it, but it has to come out sometime.
That's right. So yes, some people can suppress their tics for short amounts of time. And some people can do it without something else happening. But most of the kids that I work with, if they suppress, it comes out later, and maybe even more than the tic that they would have had if they hadn't suppressed. So there are advantages and disadvantages. Probably the most research-based, progressive, well, the intervention that works the best is called, it used to be called habit reversal. And people are trying to kind of change the name because habit implies that the kid with Tourette's has a bad habit that we're trying to reverse, and that's not the case. And so the most newest term is called Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention Training, CBIT for short. And what CBIT does is the first part of it is an awareness. So the kids understand what that tic is. And some kids can learn to recognize the feeling prior to. So I think of a sneeze sometimes. You ever have that tickle in your nose, right? And you know that sneeze is going to come. You know that sneeze is going to come, and you have that feeling, you know, and you know it's going to come, sort of like that. Or if you hold your eyes open and someone tells you you can't blink, you can't blink, you can't blink, and you start to get that, I have to blink, I have to blink. That's that urge piece. It's sort of, I hear kids describe it as an itch that they have to scratch, right? And so the first part is getting them to recognize that precursor, right? That feeling, that urge. The second part is providing them with an interfering or competing behavior. So if it were a student whose tic was the shoulder jerk, you would actually have them stretch their neck. This might be one of the interfering behaviors. You stretch their neck and pull their shoulders down. It's an opposite muscular reaction to begin to work on not fulfilling that tic, but still fulfilling some type of the urge. So you still give them a behavior to do, but you give them an interfering behavior with the tic. And if you couple that with some reinforcement for not ticking, even though it's not really within their voluntary control, there has been great success with this comprehensive behavioral intervention training. And so there are some therapies out there that can help, and combined with some medication, you know, you may be able to alleviate the symptoms of Tourette's a bit. You're not going to make it go away, but you may be able to control it a little bit better.
Now, for those who are watching and probably thinking, is this something that is passed on from family to family?
It does have a genetic component to it, although we don't always see it in every generation. And so you may have someone who's carrying kind of that gene, and I'm not sure if they've actually, you know, decided which gene it is, but I know that it can skip a generation and then manifest. You also have to realize that there are other neurological deficits like attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, obsessive compulsive thinking, you know, those kinds of things are also related to Tourette's. And many times you find a student with the vocal and motor tics, and they also have ADHD, or they also have OCD, or they have all three of them. And what you might see in that generational is someone who has the OCD, but not the tic part. But then the next generation, you may see Tourette's. And so you will kind of see some links to ADHD type behaviors, OCD type behaviors, and then the tic behaviors.
Some of the work that Joseph Ortiz is doing and yourself is doing is educating people about Tourette's syndrome. And tell us a little bit about the reaction that you get from teachers who may have a student in their class who has Tourette's. How do they handle it? How do they cope?
Well, I tell you, the most important thing, I think, is this awareness. And one of the things that I didn't know before I started working with Tourette's is that it actually waxes and wanes. And you may have a period of a week, a month, or even a year where the symptoms kind of diminish. And so teachers see a kid over here, you know, last year I saw you in this class and you didn't have any of these behaviors. You can choose to do it, or, you know, you're choosing to behave like this, because they saw them relatively free of those behaviors. And now in their room, the behaviors are really manifesting. And so it's really important for teachers to know that just because a kid sometimes isn't ticking or manifesting those other types of behaviors, the ADHD behaviors, the obsessive compulsive behaviors, that doesn't mean that they're choosing when and where to do them. It's just a part of the neurological waxing and waning of the symptoms that's happening. So I think that's one of the most important points. Another thing is environment can trigger or make those symptoms much worse. And depending on if you have OCD and you obsess about particular things, like symmetry, you know, we have a lot of kids that obsess about symmetry and balance and making sure things are equal. They may walk into a room where all the desks are on one side of the room, and just that is like anxiety producing, and they're going to tick more, they're going to obsess more, they're not going to be able to pay attention in that class as much as they do maybe in a class that's very symmetrical. Now that's very individual for that particular kid with Tourette's, but teachers need to know that there are environmental conditions that can exacerbate the symptoms. And so they'll go and see a kid, let's say a high school kid who moves around, or a middle school kid that moves around from class to class. Well, they're not having any of those symptoms in that class, but in my class they're doing these things. They're choosing to do that in my class, you know, and so we have this huge misperception that it is within the kid's control, and it's really not. It's involuntary.
And it probably makes the learning process really challenging for these kids.
Extremely challenging. I've been working with kids with disabilities and exceptionalities, all the way from gifted to autistic, for the last 27 years, and I have to tell you, I think prescribing an individualized education for kids with Tourette's is the most complex, because it is so individual per kid, and you know, the environmental factors just weigh heavily upon whether they're going to exhibit those symptoms or not. And I have to tell you, I haven't found the prevalent study yet, but the kids that I have worked with that have Tourette's are also gifted. And Joseph tells me from when he went to Washington that most of the kids that he met as Tourette's ambassadors were also gifted. So on one hand, we have this kid with these disabilities that we have to accommodate for, but on the other hand, they deserve to have a very rigorous education, you know, honors classes, AP courses. And so how do you blend those accommodations with those high rigor classes? So it is very challenging.
I think many people, when they think about Tourette's and associate it with someone, they think, oh, they can't really do this. Like I asked Joseph, can you drive? What are some of the things that you can do? And sure enough, he can drive, and as you mentioned, they're very gifted.
Well, absolutely. And you know what, I found it interesting in some of my earlier studies too. There are surgeons with Tourette's, with motor tics.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But when they're in surgery, they are in their neurological zone. You know, I don't know how else to say it except that they're in the zone. And that same kind of thing, I think when you interviewed Joseph, he talked about swimming and how that just kind of puts him in the zone, and his tics and obsessive thinking and just kind of fades away for him. And I think the same thing kind of happens, maybe, I'm not sure about the driving thing, I'll be honest, but I think maybe the same kind of thing may happen. The particular challenge or the place in the brain that's being utilized may kind of override the involuntary part of the Tourette's.
Would you recommend for parents who may have someone with Tourette's to get them involved in a sport?
I think sports are wonderful. I do think that it has to be tailored individually for the child. The child has to find something that's meaningful for them. We don't just say, okay, I'm a dad and I like baseball, my kid's gonna play baseball, and you know, that's gonna really help his Tourette's, because if it's anxiety producing, then it's not going to help. But physical exercise has been shown to be very beneficial for kids with Tourette's. But I do think that if we're going to prescribe a particular sport, that it should be the kid's choice and something they're very interested in. And they may need to try a couple of things before they decide, okay, this is the one that I feel most comfortable in.
If a parent has a child and is showing some of the earlier symptoms, rush to the doctor or kind of wait it out? And
actually, I believe in early intervention. I really do, and I think for many different areas that early intervention is key, and so I wouldn't wait. There's nothing wrong with ruling out something, you know, and if you see if it's not really interfering with their daily life or their school abilities, maybe you can wait it out. But if you start to see that there are symptoms that are interfering with their ability to do well at school, with their peer relationships, with their home life and their family relationships, I think it is important to see a specialist.
Now, when someone who has Tourette's, when they're teenagers, is that when it's kind of difficult, and as they get into adulthood, it kind of not goes away, but slows down?
I would say that for a lot of cases, that's what happens. We see very minimal symptoms, maybe 7 years of age, starts to come out a little more mid-teens, if we're looking at the typical Tourette's person, but none of them are really typical. But if you're looking, you have kind of a peak at that mid-teen area, and then you have a little falling off, and a lot of times in adulthood, you will see a major falling off of symptoms. Although sometimes the obsessive thinking will continue, but the tics will kind of, dissipate. So parts of it may continue on, other parts may diminish themselves. And I would say, yeah, that's, for some people, that's evident. For other people, it's not. And so it's really hard to say, who's that person going to be where it's going to get better for them? They don't really know.
So if someone wanted information about Tourette's syndrome, is there a website that they can go to, or do you have a website? And do you have any community presentations scheduled for maybe this fall? Or?
We will be doing some presentations this fall, but I don't have the dates for those. They will be on my website, so you could always look there. It's Comallie, C-O-M-A-L-L-I-E -Caplan, CAPLAN.com. So you could look there for the community presentations. There'll probably be school-based presentations that will be open to community members. Also, the best place to go is the TSA.org, the Tourette's Association, the Tourettes Syndrome Association. They have multiple materials. They have training on the comprehensive behavior intervention. So there are a lot of things available for parents, for kids, for teachers, anybody who has an association with kids with Tourette's or adults with Tourette's.
All right, we'll look for that information. Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
All right, and thank you for watching. Remember, you can see this entire interview online at krwg.org. And while you're there, you can visit our blog, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. I'm Carlos Correa. Until next time.